cooking. And food, you lot do cooking, man.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. This kind of fits into what we were been studying with Riyadh al-Salihin, because we were looking at one of the most important aspects after food, of course, and after salat and the pillars of Islam. Islam gives a lot of importance on this concept, and like I said, we've been looking at this for the last, 2, 3, 4 weeks maybe. Doesn't reach. For the last few weeks. So, I mean, some of this is going to be repetition if you've been attending the Riyadh al-Salihin lessons. Some of it's going to be repetition, but even if it is a repetition of what we've done before, it kind of acts as a summary and a compilation of all the points that we've been making. So the topic here we've got today is marriage, its etiquette and the framework, and I've put down framework even though it's not been advertised as a framework, but that word is very, very important because that helps us understand what marriage is about and what the objective of marriage actually is. And like I've said just a minute ago, arguably with some of the scholars, as we will discover here, after your obligation with Allah, this topic is one of the most important aspects of your Islam. To the extent that Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah said marriage is so important that Allah Jalla wa Ala has chosen it for every single prophet and messenger that He has sent. There is not a prophet or a messenger except that he got married. And there is an ayah to prove that, and like I said, that's going to come. And what he said, actually, he extended on that, and he's saying that marriage is actually part of a person's aqeedah. Marriage is actually part of a person's, and how it fits into aqeedah, we will see, where Muhammad al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, one of the scholars of Islam, passed away around 20 years ago. He's got a book where he's explaining what Islam is and the basic fundamentals of the objectives of Islam. And we're going to look at more of that tomorrow anyway. But here the topic is about marriage. And within that framework, within that description of what Islam is and what it wants from you, he's put down this framework. So we're going to get to that also. But Ibn al-Jawzi, going back to his statement, he was saying that it's so pivotal and it's so important to your Islam. Sorry about this chair, it's very creaky. Is that without marriage and without this framework and without these proper etiquettes, your level of steadfastness of the salah and the siyam, the zakah and all those things that you typically know to be of Islam will fall. And we know that, and he gave an example. For example, Musa alayhi salam, he got married. He ran away from Fir'aun and he got married. What was his dowry? Working for 8 years, but if you finish 10, that is from you. As in, if you do 10, that is from your piety. His father-in-law said, "Get married to my daughter, but you on the condition that you stay here, work with me for 8 years." Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, said, is it possible that one of the best prophets and one of the best people that ever walked this planet took out a mortgage for 10 years to pay back a dowry for something which is not important? Is that possible? It's not possible. So what the point he is making here is that marriage is so important that even Musa alayhi salam knew that. And what that led to is him becoming steadfast, and it set a foundation for him. And he wasn't a prophet yet. And he was walking with his family, and that's when he became a prophet. So this is what we're saying here. So it's very important as it falls into, the creed of a Muslim, the objectives of Islam, to know what Islam is and know what it wants from you. So what is marriage in Islam? Allah says in the Quran, فَانْكِهُ مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ. And this is a dress that's being given to the men, but it also applies to the women. As the ulama agreed that a woman can propose to a man. So if she finds somebody who is suitable, she can make that proposition for herself. But this addresses to men, but it applies to both genders. Allah Jalla wa Ala is saying in this ayah, marry whoever you want from the opposite gender. And the word nikah, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah is saying this here, in the Quran, the word nikah, as is highlighted here, only comes in the context of a mutual agreement between two people to get married. It comes in a context. So the word nikah actually means different things. It can mean different things in different contexts. But in the Quran, the word nikah refers to this, a mutual agreement between both parties to get married. So the man will make the proposition or the proposal, or the woman may make the proposal, and they will agree that they are going to get married. What does that mean? What this means is that they have now entered into a contract where they are assuming responsibility for themselves as being the spouse. And this, like we've said, is the way of the people that came before us. The prophets and the messengers, none of them went single. Allah says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلًا, we have sent prophets and messengers min qablik, before you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ أَزْوَاجًا وَذُرِّيَّةً, that we have made for every single one of them wives and progeny. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, marriage is an ancient practice since the time that Allah has created Adam. And this is something that goes back to the very first prophet in Islam, to the very first Sharia of Islam. And this continued amongst the descendants of Adam alayhi salam, amongst all the prophets and all the messengers. So now, as you can see, if it wasn't important, if it wasn't part of your aqeedah, if this framework was something which was not important with Allah, then this would not happen. And this point would not even be there. But before we talk about marriage and before we talk about that framework, we have to look at something which is very important for us all, and I'm sure most of us are single here. And this is a very important point that has been made by many of the ulama. And this is what I found to be one of the most profound statements. Allah says in the Quran, and we know the story of Yusuf. Yusuf was called by a woman to do something which was not befitting for a prophet or an ordinary person. She was calling him to do an act which is only reserved for that contract that we talked about. It's only reserved in a manner which protects a person's aqeedah. But she didn't want that. So she made that proposal to him and he rejected her. And as a result, she said, if you don't listen to me, then I will put you in prison. Yusuf alayhi salam's response was, قَالَ رَبِّ السِّجْنِ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْهِ. Being in prison is actually better and more beloved to me, مِمَّا يَدْعُونَنِي إِلَيْهِ. It's better than what she is telling me to do. And if you leave me to them, and if you don't protect me, وَأَكُمْ مِنَ الْجَاهِلِينَ, I will be like them. This is a prophet who is saying that. What we can derive from this, and this is the point that I'm trying to make here, that before marriage and after marriage, this is an extremely important point. Because some people think that, before marriage, not a lot of people are safe, and I don't think anybody can ever feel that they're safe. But even after marriage, some people think that, okay, once I get married and I'll settle down, my desires and my urges and my lusts and all that will settle and everything will be channeled and I won't have any fitna anymore in my life. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Unfortunately, it's not the case. Trust me, we have a counselling service in our local masjid and we deal with situations all the time, and most of it is what? Before marriage, after marriage. Obviously is after marriage. What Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said about this ayah, he said, Yusuf alayhi salam, why did he ask to remain in jail? Why did he say that being in jail is actually more beloved to me than being free? He said, the reason why is because being in jail would isolate himself from the fitna that was outside, what that woman was calling him to, and what all those people in the city were talking about. And everybody knew, it became an open secret, even though it happened behind closed doors, everybody knew what this woman was telling him to do. He was extremely handsome, etc. So he was saying, the best position for me is to be isolated, because he knew if he had been released, he would fall into temptation once again. And then end up being of those people who are ignorant, those people who are negligent, those people who are astray. So what we learn from this now is before marriage and after marriage, it takes a lot of work. And that's why, again, I will say it's part of sabr. And there's many statements from the Quran and from the narrations of Islam, and the reason why I say narrations from the text of the Prophet ﷺ, but even from the ulama, some of them said, as-sabr nisfuddin, that sabr is half of your religion. And this is all reinforcing and cementing the point that I made in the very, very beginning, which is that this framework, nikah, is actually what Allah wants from you from your Islam. Islam has encouraged us to get married, and like we've said, it's part of that framework that we need to uphold. But where is the evidence for that, and what did the Prophet ﷺ say about that? Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh said, we were a group of young men that were there with the Prophet ﷺ, and they complained to the Prophet ﷺ, and this is in Medina, and they were complaining to the Prophet ﷺ that we don't have enough money to get married. We want to get married, we're ready for it, but we don't have enough money. So the Prophet ﷺ said, O young men of Medina, whoever is able to get married, then he should do so. Why would he say that? If people are complaining to him and saying, we're not able to get married, we want to get married, but we're not able to get married. But then the Prophet ﷺ then said, if you're able to get married, then get married. Doesn't that seem like contradictory? As in that they're complaining, and he's telling them to do what they're complaining about. But what the ulama have said is that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here is that what you should do is work towards being able to be in a position for you to get married. And it could be that you need to work on it financially, but it could also be that this dowry that you're thinking about might not be something which is financial. It might not be something which is tangible. And we know in other instances the Prophet ﷺ got people married to each other with the dowry of teaching the Quran, and asking the women sometimes to make their dowries lighter to facilitate getting married. So what this statement actually means is that they've come and asked the Prophet ﷺ, they've said, look, we're not in a position financially to get married, even though we are ready to do so. The Prophet ﷺ saying, it's not all about money. And this is again reinforcing this framework, and this aqid, it all goes back to that. And if he's not able to do this, and if he's not able to find someone, or if he's not able to have the financial means, then he should lower his gaze. This will be better for his lusts. Going back to this point here. This will be better. And whoever is not able to do any of these things, and if it's not working for him, then he should fast, because then it will be a shield for him against his temptations. Bukhari and Muslim. Why would it be a shield for him? Because fasting has a huge effect on a person's personality, has a huge effect on a person's lusts. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said that when you fast, shaitan is not able to flow through your body as he would do whilst you are nourishing yourself on a normal basis. Yeah? So let's think about that. I mean, let's let that sink in. Not saying anything to you guys. Barakallahu feekum. Friday night, Saturday night, people, they go out to eat, and they want to indulge, and they want to indulge, and they want to indulge. And their veins are getting moisturized and moisturized even more. What we learn from this hadith is that that has an adverse effect on their fight against shaitan. And arguably, some of the worst things happen at those points during the week. The Prophet ﷺ here is saying, if you fast, you are restricting the channels for shaitan from entering into you. And also we learn, other ulama have said, that when you are fasting, you can't have something which is mubah. This water for me is mubah. Sometimes it might even be wajib for me to drink this. But whilst you are fasting, you are sacrificing that connection to things which are permissible for you. Then how about things which are from your desires? It will have an even more profound effect in you becoming a better person, and it will affect your personality. What that will then, in reaction to that, what that will happen then is then it will put you in a good position when you are able to get married, of piety and uprightness and control and not living for the sake of fulfilling your desires. We'll look at that a bit more later on. Ibn Mas'ud said later, and this is a narration which he says about himself, and remember that he's the one who's narrated this hadith. He was a young man at this point also. He said, and this is his understanding of marriage now, he later said that if I only had 10 days to live, would he go for Hajj? Would he go for Umrah? What would you do if you had 10 days to live? He said, if I had 10 days to live and I knew I would die at the end of them, and I had any desire to get married, I would get married for the fear of fitna. And what this means is that he knows that marriage is one of those most important things after your salah and siyam, which keeps you upright. And we've talked about that over again. But also, it helps you to channel your desires. And it's from the wisdom of a person where he realizes his weakness and he works on that weakness. So this is why he's saying here, if I've got a desire, if I'm okay, then it's fine. If I'm an old man, then it's fine. But if I've got a desire, and I know I've only got 10 days to live, then being in that state of fitna, being in that state of me being open to any kind of attack, doesn't make sense for me. Now, a person might think, okay, well, that's a good statement, but how do we know how long you've got left? We might not make it home tonight. And the fitna, arguably, the fitna now is much worse than the fitna at the time of Ibn Mas'ud. Zina is in people's faces all the time. It's in people's pockets, it's in people's ears. So now we can clearly see that this statement has a great deal of hikmah, and it applies even more so now in our times than it did in time of Ibn Mas'ud. It's also narrated that Sa'id ibn Jubair, one of the pious Salaf, one the student of Ibn Abbas and student of Umar radiallahu anhu, others from the companions, senior companions, he said that Ibn Abbas, my teacher, and the famous companion radiallahu anhuma, said to me, have you got married yet? And he said, no, I have not got married. So he said, get married, for the best of this ummah are the ones who have the most wives. Now the reason why I put this in here is not to start a debate on equality or polygamy and all those kind of things. That's not the point. The point that I'm making here is that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma is teaching us that those people who uphold this framework and have that sabr and have that level of responsibility the most, they are the best of this ummah. And we're going to get to the framework, but if you have the framework firmly established here, and we know that the Prophet ﷺ, I can't think of any instance where he got married for the sake of his own desires. Even Aisha, he was told by Allah to go marry this woman. There is no woman that he got married for the sake of pure desires. That he looked at her and he said, I got to have her. That doesn't exist. And the Prophet ﷺ actually had 9 wives when he passed away. So when we get that understanding and marry it with this, no pun intended, then we understand the correct understanding of this statement and the understanding of polygamy and the understanding of the framework that we're going to get to. Ibrahim ibn Maysara said to Tawus, and Tawus was another student of Ibn Abbas and others from the companions. And Tawus said to me, and Tawus has been quoted here a couple of times, either get married, or I will say to you what Umar radiallahu anh said to Abu Zawaid. Nothing is keeping you from getting married except impotence or immorality. Again, let that sink in a minute. Either you're not able to get married, there's something wrong with you, not necessarily your fault, could be your fault, because now they're saying impotency is rising because people are leaving marriage. Look at the adverse. People are thinking that the less they get married, the more they can go and do what they want freely. But in actual fact, studies are showing that people are getting more diseases or whatever it could be because they've left this framework. They've left the aqidah. That's one aspect. So Umar, look at the wisdom of this man and the foresight. He's actually talking about us right now. Umar, 1440 years ago, said, either you get married, or you will end up like this, or you will end up like this. And isn't that the state of many societies today, where people don't want to get married, and they have problems in their lives, they have mental disorders, they have all these, and these are one of the things that people are looking at right now also when it comes to gender rectification. Again, I don't want to go on a tangent, but this is very important because it's connected to this, because what people are saying is that their desires and their gender and their profiling and how they feel about them, their orientation and all those things needs to be corrected because they don't feel that they've been brought up on the right fitrah. So they're saying is that I've been created or evolved in a wrong manner, so I need to go and correct that through science and medicine. What that then creates, and this is proven with different studies, including with people who have been through the process themselves in gender, what they call correction, which is that there is a high level of disease and mental disorders connected to this correction that they feel that they are getting. And Umar radiallahu anhu is telling us that right now. Either you get married, or then you could end up with problems yourselves, whether it's mental or whether it's physical, or you will lead a life of immorality. Again, this is within the subtitle of getting married and the importance of getting married in Islam. So I also said worship is not complete, and this is what I was saying here to you before, in the very, very beginning, is that after your salat, after your siyam, after your hajj, after you looking after your parents, after you studying knowledge and all those kind of things, your Islam, look what Tawus is saying, and he's one of the senior scholars from his generation, and he said that your worship, you could do hajj 50 times in your life. I actually know people who have done hajj 60, 70 times in their lives. He's saying none of that is correct, none of it is complete, unless a person gets married and preserves that framework and holds that framework for himself. So what is that framework that we're talking about? This is commonly referred to as tarbiyah. Has anybody not heard of tarbiyah? Good. Oh, okay. So tarbiyah basically means, it's an Arabic term, which refers to nurturing and upbringing. So give your children an upbringing, give your children a good education, give your children firm foundations in Islam. And culturally, a lot of these people, what they will do then is send their children off to an evening madrasa, and they would think that that is being tarbiyah. So they go away, they learn how to pray, they learn how to read Arabic, they learn, certain supplications and remembrances. And then when they come home, you will cement that with other things and supplement that. That's all tarbiyah. And tarbiyah is the framework that we're talking about. Now, like I just said now, culturally, there is a huge misconception where people feel that tarbiyah happens until that your age of 6, 7, 8. Once you finish the Quran, or once you've reached a certain age, you can go ahead and do what you want. Before looking at tarbiyah, and this is now going to give us the importance of upright tarbiyah. And tarbiyah I'm talking about in the Arabic sense, but you can call it the framework that I'm referring to in the English sense. Before looking at tarbiyah, let's look at a parable of the dunya that's been given by one of the scholars. And this parable is talking about marriage and a framework, but if you don't have that marriage and the framework, you would end up being somewhere around about here. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, the dunya, and please excuse the language here, the dunya is like a prostitute for the one without tarbiyah. And I put that in brackets myself, because the dunya is needed for you to have a high estate in the akhirah. Nobody is saying that you don't need the dunya. Nobody is saying don't drink water and get a good job for yourself and study and become something that that's going to be fruitful for your communities and the ummah. Nobody is saying that. What we are saying is that you studying in the university, you come from a different city and you're settling yourselves here so that you can seek knowledge, so that you can become better people yourself, you can offer more to your community, you can offer more to the ummah. All of that is a noble reward. And that's how Islam flourished. And we'll look more about that tomorrow. But here we're talking about those people who have the false understanding of the dunya, those people who don't have that framework, those people who are living that life of immorality. And it's like a prostitute, this dunya, for them. Why? Either she will give herself, so what she will do is she'll present herself to you. And what you need to do is sacrifice some of your assets to this woman to get an exchange. It could be a man. But what happens is that the more you chase this woman for your desires, the more she will ask for your assets. Yeah, you with me so far? Yeah? So you've seen her once, you see her again, you've got a connection with her, maybe you want to see her a few times, then she will say, okay, you need to give me more money. After all of that, if somebody else comes along, giving a better offer, she will leave you in a flush. And what will happen then is that you will be left ruined, embarrassed, and robbed. And you've got nothing left. That is the parable of the dunya. That is the parable of those people who don't have that tarbiyah, that nurturing, that upbringing. Therefore, they are devoid of that framework and the proper etiquette of what is needed after all of those things that you commonly associate with Islam, the prayer. So the tarbiyah begins at home. And Ibn al-Qayyim again, rahimahullah, has got a very extensive bit here. I don't think I'm going to read all of it because we've already taken a lot of time. But here, he's saying tarbiyah of the individual in the household is extremely important. And what he is saying here, in a nutshell, is saying that most of the problems within the person's life, and their homes, and their communities, and society as a whole, falls back on the shoulders of the parents. If you come from a good household, then you don't have anything to worry about. But if the child is taught from a very early age that all you need to do is pursue your whims and your desires, then what you are doing is you're not being kind to the child at all, and in fact you are disgracing him or her, you are wronging them, you're not showing them mercy. And any kind of misfortune that then falls in the child's life, either from the dunya or the akhirah, is because of the lack of tarbiyah and that framework existing in a person in an individualistic level, but also within the house itself. And if you think, like he ends here now saying, if you think of the causes of a child's misguidance and corruption, you will see that it's mostly the fault of the parents. And he explains that more so here. And if you want it, I can send it to Nabil and he can pass it on, inshallah. So, therefore, what is this tarbiyah that we're talking about, and what are the stages? And there are 4 primary stages to this tarbiyah. You work on yourself as an individual, irrespective of your age or your gender. You know that you've got certain holes in your personality, in your connection with Allah, and your practicing of Islam. You know where you are at. And if you work on those things individually, you'll become upright and you'll have what Islam refers to as having taqwa. When you do that, and I've seen this over again, and this has been tried and tested over and over again, and in actual fact history proves this also, that when a person does that as an individual, then it will have an effect on a person's family, whether he's married, or whether he's still a child, or whether he doesn't even have any parents. Whatever the situation, the people that he is living with, they will see that this person has become actually he's a better person now. He's not doing the same ghibah that we're doing. He's not spending 4, 6, 7 hours on his phone just surfing complete rubbish, and then as a effect of that has meaningless conversations. It's not about that. They will see that it's had a change in this person's life, the way he prays and all those kind of things. Then what happens is that if an individual works on himself and he becomes upright and he feels that, okay, now I've kind of sorted myself out and I've let go of some of those things that I've been doing and I've become better in those things that I've been lacking in, then what will happen is that he'll look for somebody else who is like-minded and they will get married. So now we've got a good brother and a good sister, both having taqwa, both trying to continuously work on themselves, having taqwa, and taqwa basically means for you trying to do the right thing, basically. Is this something that your Lord is going to be pleased with or not pleased with? Is this statement, is this thought, is this action, is the lack of this action something which is going to please my Lord, or is it going to be something which takes me further away from Him? That is taqwa. Now, if you have a man and a woman and they get married on that state, what's going to happen? Are they going to go out on the weekend and do things that are not halal? Are they going to spend their time wasting their time? And are they going to argue? Are they going to... Obviously, there are going to be times where they don't see eye to eye. But like Hassan al-Basri said, if you get married, if you are a guardian over your daughter, and you want to get married, you want her to get married to somebody, make sure that the person has taqwa. Why? Because if you don't like him and she doesn't like him, if he has taqwa, they will live with each other honorably. They will make sacrifices. They will try and reconcile. They will try and bend over each other's backs for what. And if he doesn't like her, and if she doesn't like him, and it doesn't work out, he's still going to deal with her honorably. And this is the idea here. Taqwa a prerequisite of taqwa is that a prerequisite of marriage is a person has taqwa. And the ulama of the madhahib of the fiqh, and I'm sure everybody is quite familiar with this anyway. If you are a guardian over your daughter, or you've got a sister, for example, and she comes home, or he goes home and he says, I want to get married to this girl, what's the first thing that you think about? How rich is he? What does she look like? Obviously not. The first thing you think about is something in the lines of, right, okay, well, where did you meet this person? What kind of background do they come from? What religious thought do they follow? Something which is trying to look at the credibility of this person, right? This is exactly the same when it comes to Islam, but Islam makes it even more specific in saying taqwa. So now when you have a man who has taqwa and a woman who has taqwa, they get married, what's going to happen is they're going to create a household of taqwa, and children are going to be brought up with tarbiyah. And when that happens, one household has taqwa with the man and the woman, children with taqwa, then it becomes contagious. And this is exactly how the Prophet ﷺ established himself in Medina, and it's exactly how Islam spread throughout the peninsula. And the ulama of seerah and history and hadith have said over and over again that people went as merchants and people went as du'at and those kind of things, and Islam flourished in much more of a positive way than it did with battles and those kind of things that are, commonly ascribed to Islam. So now the point here is, this is the framework. You work on yourself. When you work on yourself, you will see an effect on your household. You work towards gaining some kind of progression in your household. When you got that, whether you're married or not at this stage, it will have an effect. If you were yet to get married, you get married to someone who is like-minded, then it will create development. And Islam teaches us this. Now Islam, as we all know, has so many narrations when it comes to how you deal with your mother, and how you deal with your father, and how you deal with your wife and your husband, etc. And I don't think any of these are hidden to us. Abu Hurairah asked the Prophet ﷺ, who is the person who has the most level of deservedness of my companionship, that I should be with the most, who should be the nicest to the most? The Prophet ﷺ said, your mom, your mom, your mom. Well known. So this now clearly is showing the framework. Does it stop at your mum? No, it doesn't. The Prophet ﷺ said, your father is the door to the very middle, I've put down depth here, but the very middle of Jannah. And the reason why I put down depth here is that you are right in the middle. You're not the outskirts. You're not maybe at the top, you're not at the bottom, but you are there in a safe position in Jannah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, now it's up to you. Either you lose that door, break down the door, but you can either lose the door, become very relaxed on it, or you lock it. The Prophet ﷺ said, you could preserve it or you can lock it. That's some of the virtues connected to your father. And again, it's going back to that framework. The responsibility that we have over one another. What about your wife? What about if you now are a husband? What is that connection that you have to have in marriage, in that framework towards your wife? The Prophet ﷺ said, the whole world is full of temporary pleasures. Everything's going to end. We all know that. But the best of those temporary pleasures of this world is a righteous wife. If you have a righteous wife with you, then your dunya will become a lot easier. Why? Because of that framework. Taqwa marries taqwa, produces taqwa. What about children? So now you are a man, you're a woman, you've got dependents, you've got people to look after. Obviously, if you've got your parents, then those narrations apply. What about if you're looking down now when it comes to the family tree? The Prophet ﷺ said, it is sufficient for a man or a woman as a sin to neglect those people who he is responsible for in that framework. Sufficient. Even if you had no other sin, you will be extremely blameworthy just on that one. And this is one of the biggest things that we find when it comes to our counselling services. And unfortunately, we deal with issues like this all the time. A guy, he's praying, he's in there in the masjid, front line Fajr sometimes. And you wouldn't think that this man has got problems in his house, and he comes with his wife knocking on the door. We've got problems. Why? I'm not trying to say that he's done something wrong or she's done something wrong, but this is my point. It's not just about your salah, it's not just about your reciting of the Quran and those things that you normally typically associate with Islam. What the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us here is that if you don't have that framework, then that is as sufficient as a sin for you to be casted as somebody who is not upholding Islam properly. And if that continues, individual, family, marriage, then it will have an effect on the community. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Ibn Taymiyyah has a book when he's talking about the objective and the meaning of Islam and the whole, the truthfulness of the message of Islam. And we know it because of the objectives that it gives out. And one of those things, he said, is that if you have this framework successfully established in your lives, in your houses, you can then see the truthfulness and the manifestation of Islam. Question: how does a person's framework become manipulated? This is like the second part of the lecture, because in actuality the lecture has been titled, what was the title of the lecture again?
Marriage and opposite gender interaction.
And interaction. See, that now for me I would think that's probably a different lecture altogether, but it is kind of important because it does tie in, and we're just going to mention a few things here about those interactions which could manipulate that framework. And one of the biggest things is that what will manipulate that framework and what will compromise it are indulgences. And indulgences, we're talking about food, we're talking about drink, but we're also talking about a person's wanting to satisfy his desires. And that's becoming ever more increasing. Now, I was even watching in the news recently that people are saying that homelessness is increasing because more and more people are becoming irresponsible in their lives and they just want to satisfy their desires. To the extent that some people would rather live on the street to satisfy their desires, this is just a theory, rather than be responsible and pay off the mortgage and go to work and do all those things. They'd rather live on the street in -5 outside so that they can do whatever they're doing to put them in that financial situation. And it's increasing. And it is increasing. Houses are being repossessed and all those kind of things because people are infatuated with their indulgences. They are obsessed with trying to satisfy their wants and their needs. And the Prophet ﷺ himself said, and he gives a very good indication here, that this whole dunya, nothing he was connected to from it, because he knew that this is not the objective for why you are here. This is not the purpose of your creation. The purpose why every single one of us has been created is for you to enter Jannah. That is the only reason why Allah has created you. He doesn't want to put you in the hellfire, but it's your choice whether you go to Jannah or not. But He wants you to return home. Where's home? Jannah. Adam lived in Jannah and he was taken out because of his mistake. But now He wants us all to go back. But there is a sworn enemy who's saying, no, you're not going back home, you're coming with me. And they want you to take you to the fire. The Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that very, very well here, that these indulgences will take you away from going back home. But he said that there are two things. If there was something that I was connected to, and I did like and did have an enjoyment in the dunya, was to smell nice, and to have good hygiene and be presentable and look nice, and perfume, and women. Being good to them, being nice with them, showing compassion, spending time with them. But one of the ulama has actually said that what we can derive from this is that desires and your connection to the dunya creates a love for your desires to be satisfied. And this is the nature of Bani Adam. When he has an alcoholic drink, he doesn't just stop there. You won't find people who just casually drink. You don't find people who just casually smoke or do drugs. People then become addicted and they want that. And now the levels of addiction are things that are not intoxicating. Some things that will cloud your judgment are not substances anymore. So he's saying here, the Sheikh his name is Hisham Muhammad Tahiri, he said desires create love. That's why he loved from the dunya women and perfume, because these two brought him joy, and that joy was connected to his akhirah. Yeah? So for him to look good and smell good made it that Islam was being presented in a nice way. And when he stands in front of his Lord, he's presenting himself in a nice way, etc. And these women wasn't for the sake, like I've said before, he didn't never get married for the sake of desires, never. In actual fact, one of the women came back to him and she was a widow and she was going to be punished by her father-in-law, by her own natural father, biological father, for being Muslim. She went away to Abyssinia, and she was coming back to Mecca because her husband passed away. If she was going to go home, she was going to be beaten by her own father, domestic abuse. And we're covering this in our Seerah classes. Some of those people at the time in Mecca, Uthman ibn Affan, his uncle and his parents, they used to wrap him in a garment and then they used to set it alight. Bilal used to be choked to death. But just before he died, they used to let it go a little bit and then they used to drag him in the streets of Mecca. And the torment and the torture was very, very dire. This woman, Sauda, she came back from Ethiopia. Khadija's just passed away. The Prophet ﷺ said, I will marry you. Come. He didn't even have that connection, as the ulama have said. He didn't even have that connection of love. He's just lost his wife, he was married to for a very long time, and he had a deep level of intimacy and connection, compassion and love with her. It's not that he can go and marry someone else. But he only married her, why? So that she wouldn't be tormented and tortured by her father. The Prophet ﷺ, his connection to women is not what people paint. He got married to women so that the deen can be preserved in that framework that we're talking about. And that's why he encouraged us to be nice towards women and treat them nicely. And he even made a parable of them as being glass vessels. Hold them, speak to them nicely, carry them nicely. The point here, going back to this, the Shaykh said that the Prophet ﷺ, that his connection to the dunya has been found in tib wa nisa, and in perfume and women. And the reason why is because it's connected to his dunya, but also, when he has that, it reduces desires for anything else. That he is sufficient, he has sufficed himself with just two. But now, unfortunately, excessiveness in our indulgences that we're living in now, and this is global. I mean, I've been in other countries, the indulgences that we have here are almost everywhere in the whole world now. It's a broader playing field. And people can have indulgences in absolutely everything now. And they can be there for hours and hours, satisfying their needs and their desires, destroying that framework. It could even be a computer game. It could even be a computer game where people become mental over being infatuated with this computer game. Then they're not becoming the responsible adult or the responsible, child towards the parent. The framework then collapses. I know of one incident where a person, I'm not going to talk about that because it's quite sensitive. Tawus said, being detached from the dunya gives the soul and body a relaxation. A person, the more he leaves the indulgences from the dunya, he actually finds more relaxation and more contentment. You switch your phone off, and there was a CEO of a company, I can't remember which one, maybe Google, but there was a CEO of a very, very big company, and what he does, every weekend, he switches his phone off. He switches his phone off. And he switches back on Monday morning. And he goes, that practice, actually, I love it, I enjoy it. I don't think about people contacting me, I'm actually dealing with the people I have in front of me. When I'm eating, I'm interacting. And he was actually one of those people who were actually saying is that human interaction is based on these little fillers that we have. So say, for example, I'm eating with my brother here. And he's eating and I'm eating, we've got nothing to say to each other. But even just that absence of speech and conversation will then spark one of us to say something, which will then carry on human communication. What's happening now is people are looking at their indulgences and their desires to pick out the phone. Forget this guy, let me see the football score. Or let me see something else. It might even be something that he's interested in, but he's just flicking through it because it's there in his face. And that's what's happening. And that's what's turning us away from the akhirah, making us even more rigid in the dunya. And this is having an adverse effect on our soul and our bodies. And we are not becoming relaxed. And even the kuffar are saying that the more you leave the dunya, the more relaxed you become. But seeking the dunya increases them both in sadness and depression. Tawus said this when more than 1400 years ago. The more you seek from the dunya, the more sadness and depression you will face. Indulgences is one of the plots of shaitan. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, shaitan will try and make you slip up in any way that he possibly can. Either he will tell you, leave Islam, upright. Will you accept that? Good. That's his job done. But if that doesn't work, he will try and make you infatuated with a major sin. And then, let's not forget that he's not going to leave it at that level. He's going to try and make it bring up here. Like maybe he'll evolve that major sin into some kind of a doubt, and then people will think, well, I don't think Islam is true, and then end up leaving Islam. But then, if that major sin doesn't work, that indulgence in kufr and major sin doesn't work, he will then make you slip up and make you fall into something which is not good, and leave what is better. So a person now will say, for example, let me go to the masjid and pray, or shall I pray at home? Well, praying in the masjid is far away, I don't have to actually go, technically. So then he becomes something ritual and habitual for him just to leave what is better, and then he falls into that level of indulgence. If he can't make you do that, then he'll make you fall into something which is disliked. It's just makruh, I know we shouldn't be doing it. People say smoking, it smells bad, but it's makruh, it's not haram. I'm of that opinion. So they end up doing, disliked becomes, the haram becomes downplayed to something we can dislike, and they think, okay, well it's just disliked. I'm doing everything else, so I'm safe. That's from the plots of shaitan. And this is the point here. If all else fails, he will hit you with the conception that what you are doing is absolutely fine. There is nothing wrong with what you are doing. I've got a mobile phone, I can sit on it for 4 or 5 hours. Where's the Prophet ﷺ said I can't sit on my phone for 4 or 5 hours? There's no dalil. It's mubah, it's permissible. And the same goes on for anything that will create that attachment of that indulgence. And this is how shaitan will get you. And once he's got you, he will make it worse for you. Until you will end up with, like what Tawus said, you become attached to the dunya, and you will end up in an area of sadness and depression, where your iman will become very, very weak and compromised, and it will become very difficult for you to find a way out and find the relaxation that you actually need. Examples of indulgences. So now this is the bit about indulgences, but what are some of these examples? And this is now going into a bit more to the point, a bit more to the detail that we were talking about when it comes to interaction. And these indulgences can destroy the framework, and I've just given you some examples here. And one of the biggest ones that the ulama have said is free mixing between the... This is a mixing, by the way. This is fine, because we're in a public place, there are a lot of women, there are a lot of men, and there are etiquettes that are being preserved. That is fine. When we're talking about mixing, when we get to now, is where there is a level of compromise to that framework. There is relaxation. There is enjoyment. There is maybe even socializing. Maybe there is entertainment. And the people from both sides are doing it for a reason. And Allah knows best what that reason is. That's when it becomes problematic. The opposite of the framework is zina. I know it's a bold statement, but if you don't have that tarbiyah, and if you don't have that framework that we were talking about, then you will fall into zina. Why would you fall into zina? Zina is adultery and fornication. Because the Prophet ﷺ has described that types of zina are of various types. It's not just the act of what people think as illegal sexual intercourse. Types of zina which are always found in modern forms of socializing, also found in modern forms of socializing between the genders. The Prophet ﷺ talks about in this hadith. The zina of the eyes is the looking, and the zina of the ears is the hearing, and the zina of the hands is the touching, and the zina, maybe it's with your phone, could be. The zina of the feet is the walking, and the heart is easily, look what the Prophet said here. And this is exactly what we were just talking about with the indulgences and with shaitan trying. The heart is easily persuaded, and it has hopes. Your heart has hopes that I've got lust, and maybe that lust can be fulfilled. Even if it's haram, that's what Bani Adam is. That's what the nature of human beings are. They have desires, and they want those desires to be fulfilled. And all of this is then confirmed by his private. Then, is he actually going to see it through or not? That would become then the major zina that we all kind of, refer to. But all of this has a precursor towards it. So when we are compromising the framework, we are actually falling into either one of these. Islam, going back to the interaction part, differentiates between the following. Now, an interaction between a man and a woman who are not married to one another or not related to one another are typically in one of these three categories. Either a person is alone with that woman who he is not supposed to be alone with, Islamically. Then in that scenario, the Prophet ﷺ said that there are no two people who are left alone except Shaitan is the third. Imam al-Nawawi said that there is complete consensus between the ulama that a man is not allowed to be alone with another woman that he is not married to or not related to. How do we get away from khalwa? This is known as khalwa. How do we get away from being alone with the opposite gender? It could be that there are two men, one woman. There could be two women and one man. If that barrier of a person being alone and there is no fitna involved with two or three people being there together, then that would be fine. Now, unless you've got a very important meeting and it's a personal meeting or it's a disciplinary or something like that, none of us really would be in that situation, I don't think. Not on a daily basis anyway. Not in your workplace, in your universities, in your schools. So this is, or maybe the elevator, maybe you're in the lift and maybe that's a possibility, but we're talking about on a normal situation, you don't really have to worry about this one. And if you are facing yourself in this situation, look at ways of trying to make it not khalwa. Maybe have your friend with you, or maybe take the stairs or something like that. Because this is something where Islam, when it comes to interaction, will say that you are not allowed to be alone with the opposite gender. Unless it's absolutely pressing. For example, you're midway, you've got to get to the 10th floor and you can't take the stairs, something like that, then you would have to try your best in not being alone, or not facing the opposite gender, etc. Then we've got two other categories here. We've got mixing and socializing, and this is known as al-ikhtilat. And ikhtilat is often referred to as somebody who is mixing with the opposite gender for the sake of socializing and enjoyment. And some of the ulama have actually said that this is closely connected to number 3, in the sense that there could be a variable which takes number 2 and puts it into number 3 instead. Right? Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah said, and this gives an explanation as to what mixing and socializing is. Free talking without chastity and modesty and responsibility is from the worst of sins. So now there's a man and he's sitting with loads of women that he's not related to, or there's loads of men and loads of women and they're sitting closely with each other, and there are no etiquettes that they are following. They are freely talking about whatever they want. There are glances, there's prerogative speech, it's open. It could lead to something which is going to get worse. The environment might not necessarily be a very good environment. Maybe they're in one of those things that Ibn al-Qayyim was talking about, where people think, oh, this is halal, or maybe makruh, it's a shisha cafe, or it's a restaurant, or something like that. We're not doing anything wrong. He's a friend of my cousin. He's a friend of my brother. That's where shaitan tries to make you slip up. But what he is saying in Jawzi here is that when free interaction becomes rife in a community, then this is when problems occur. And he gives us an example. Before the Prophet ﷺ came, the Arabs used to indulge heavily in these kind of things. And what it led to was adultery, false speech with one another, and glances, and zina, as we know it. And then this all became the norm until they were ruined and overcome with sadness and depression and some of these things that we've looked at before by them. So this is why Islam puts a cut on it, and we're going to look at some stats also in a little while. Islam puts a cap on it, and it doesn't say that you can't interact with the opposite gender. It's not saying that. But it's saying that if you're doing it with the purpose of socializing and having a sinister intent behind it, then this is haram. Because what you are doing is you are compromising that framework from its very basis. You're not at home, you're not looking after your mum because you're chilling with a girl that you might want to do something haram with. Where's the framework? Framework's gone. You could even be married, unfortunately, or there are different scenarios. But al-alaqa, as some of the ulama have said, is that it is allowed. And this then, that variable, where you are sitting maybe with a group of sisters or brothers or some kind of gathering where there are more than, like this perhaps, then it would move from being free mixing and socializing, etc., to a relationship-based interaction. And the Sheikh said that there are three scenarios to this, and he is giving those variables. Now, some of those variables will take it back to the first one, or maybe even the second one. A man mixes with his relatives, and this is undoubtedly permitted. Okay, so this is the one that I don't think anybody will find any room for debate in. Mixing between genders without restriction, then this is, number two, is from the number two that we mentioned here. He then said, this is one of the biggest scholars of the Ummah, I would say, that this last century has seen, Muhammad ibn Ibrahim. He said, there is another scenario where mixing for a valid reason, such as a person is studying, or he's at work, or there are appointments, etc. And in that scenario, there is further detail. And he's saying there's a common misconception where people will say that they become very dismissive in this, and they say that this is haram and a man can't interact with the opposite gender or a woman with the opposite gender, etc. And our religion. And I've actually even met people living in this country who have culturally been told that their women are not even allowed to leave the house. I've actually known people until today, very recently actually, believe that women cannot go to further education. They're not allowed. And this is obviously a huge problem, because this is not what Islam is teaching. Islam is teaching that we can have an interaction, but it comes within those guidelines. So he's saying here there is a general description and there is a detailed description as to those interactions. He's saying a general one where Allah Jalla wa Ala, and he's saying that we have to remember that humans are going to be inclined towards other humans. Well, Allah has made the sexes to incline towards one another. And if there is weakness, now, this is what we're trying to say here, that a man can speak to a woman, but if there is a weakness and then his intention then changes, and then they find themselves being alone with each other and speaking with each other on the phone and all that kind of stuff, then mixing is treated very, very seriously. And if it is downplayed, then it will have a negative consequence on that person, his iman, on the other person's iman. That framework as individuals, their households will face problems, and then it will spread in the communities. Because humans are weak and they are error prone. This is a statistic that I found from Trustify. And they did a survey of about 200 people, and they were talking about infidelity affairs whilst they've been married. And this is just last year. What is the percentage of men, do you think, had admitted out of that 200 that in this country here, that they've had an affair? What do you think? Let me just put this down. What do you think? What's the percentage? They've asked 200 men, have you honestly had a relationship with somebody who's not your wife whilst you've been married? What percentage do you think? Should have thrown it down. 50. Yeah, okay, but then how many women did they admit to being with? 55% of 200 men that were asked admitted that they've had relations outside of their marriage whilst being married with 5 or more other women. 5 or more other women. This is just 200 people. Imagine if it was a huger poll. I mean, when it came to women, women weren't any better, but they were a bit more faithful to the person they were cheating with. They said that they only cheated with one man. Doesn't make it any better. Yeah.
You admitted to cheating.
Yeah.
You know what the statistic of just, for example, if they done it with just one person, you know what?
No, it's not there. It's not there. I don't know. Probably higher. It would be higher then, wouldn't it? It would logically be higher. So if the question is asking, this is saying 5 or more other women, 55% of men admitted to having relations with 5 or more other women whilst they're married, with other affairs, basically. So the question is asking, what is the percentage of a man saying that I've had a relationship with another...
Because they say that of those who
admitted, exactly, yes. So then obviously, for a man to say that he's had a relationship with another woman, but even now, the gender might be even questionable, would be higher. 32% of the men met the person they cheated with online. Now, where does that tie in with what we're talking about, indulgences? Indulgences doesn't necessarily mean alcohol and intoxication and those kind of things. Your mobile phone is an indulgence, and that is making people's iman weak and is destroying this framework, as you can clearly see here. 22% of the women met the person they cheated with on some sort of social setting, like a bar, free mixed environment. And all of this is free mixed, because I believe, it's not here, but I believe they were asking about, I'm not sure if this was the poll, because I looked at a couple of others, whether it's at the workplace. But whatever the case, at least you've got 22% here. And even if it had been 5%, there's a general principle in Islam, which is that whenever Islam prohibits something, it does it for the betterment of mankind and not for a certain group of people. So you will find people in the 1920s and 30s who are still quite elderly in our society who drink very, very casually, responsibly. And if they do get drunk, they'll get drunk in the privacy of their own home, and it won't affect their behavior outside. If that's the case, then fair enough. You can go ahead and do that. Islam, in an Islamic society also, so you can do that. Nobody's going to harm you for that. If you want to do that, it's wrong. Because it knows, Allah, our Creator knows, had He made it halal, what would have happened? It's haram right now, look what's happening. Imagine if it had been halal. 23%, and this is the same thing when it comes to phones and all these other things that we're talking about. 23% of men said the leading cause of the affair was due to a lack of satisfaction. The framework wasn't there. And this is one of the reasons why what we're talking about is the hijab. And we've talked about this before in Riyadh Salihin class. A woman, traditionally, even in this country, even if you go back 50 years, she wouldn't really be at work. And we're not saying that she can't go to work. Islam over 1400 years ago gave her that right, and that interaction that we're talking about now. She can become a businesswoman. Khadija was a businesswoman. She can go out and she can do whatever she wants. Asma bint Abi Bakr, she was a farmer. She was a farmer. She used to go outside of Medina, get her agriculture. She used to have a crop and allotment outside of Medina, and she used to bring it back to the extent that the Prophet ﷺ saw her once, and she was carrying heavy loads, and he offered her a ride. And she said, no, I'm going to carry on. Don't worry about it. The point here is Islam is not putting a cap on that. But 50, 60 years ago, women weren't working in this country. Now when they've started working, the want to get married and settling down and having a family has gone down. Their orientation has changed. And now what's happening is that when the woman, if she does end up getting married and she does have that framework within their own kind of, set of conditions, she goes out, she wakes up in the morning, she goes out to work, he gets up in the morning, he goes out to work. She looks her best, smells her best, acts her best for those people outside the house. When she comes home, she's too tired to be the best for the people inside the house. So what happens is 23% of the men said that the reason why I had an affair at work was because that woman, yes, she's somebody else's wife, but she looked the best for me. And she talked in the best manner for me. Does it make sense? That's why Islam has obligated the hijab and has made ikhtilat and interaction not categorically haram, but has put conditions on it. 28% of the women said the cause of their affair was due to a lack of emotional satisfaction. Framework has gone. The husband comes home, he's on his phone, she doesn't look good for him, or maybe he's just lazy, and then she thinks, well, he doesn't love me anymore. Let me go find somebody else who's going to buy me presents and look after me and give me that emotional satisfaction. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, there is no doubt that enabling women to mix with men is the basis of all calamities and evils. This is a comment that I've just put here in light of that poll. And it is one of the greatest causes of calamities that affects everybody, or affects everybody. It affects an individual, it affects his homes, it affects children. Children now, I know of one incident of talaq that's happening, and the child is only 2 years old. And the father is, don't want to talk about it. And it's one of the greatest causes of calamity that affects everybody, as well as being one of the causes of corruption in public and private affairs. Mixing of men with women is the cause of a great deal of immoral actions. And I put down here in brackets, divorce rates are going up, teenage pregnancies are going up, and zina to occur, and is one of the causes of widespread death. He's saying that this framework, When you drop the framework, immorality will increase, zina will increase, and even death will increase. HIV and AIDS, all of that, because the framework has not been preserved in certain societies. And ongoing diseases. STDs, some of these STDs did not even exist at the time of maybe even 100 years ago. The Sheikh then continues. Now, this is obviously taken out of the Sheikh's article. Sheikh Muhammad Ibrahim continues. There is a detailed discussion in Islam when it comes to interactions also, which is that the Sharia is very, very pragmatic, meaning not every single situation is the same. Islam has a set of foundations and it has a set of aims, noble aims that it wants to get across to mankind. And it implements them with the utmost wisdom. For example, Allah tells the believers to lower their gaze, because this will help them to protect their private parts, and this will be purer for them in their iman, and it will help them control their desires and lusts. And tell the believing women also to lower their gazes also. Allah is saying this Surah Nur. The point that we gain from this, the Shaykh is saying, that the believing men and the believing women have been told to be modest in their behavior, in their speech, to the extent of their gazes also. Be modest and take all necessary means to keep the iman and chastity preserved in your heart. Islam knows that gazes can't be averted. Islam is not telling us that you can't interact. Gazes are going to happen. Speech needs to happen. Interaction with the opposite gender needs to happen. And this is why Islam has told us that you are allowed maybe to have one gaze, maybe to speak, and maybe to make some kind of interaction, but that has to be done within that framework and that within those conditions. And we have the hadith of Ali where the Prophet ﷺ told him that you are pardoned for the first one, but don't keep staring. Then what will happen when you're staring is then you start to amplify the good bits, and you think, okay, well, that's good, I don't have that at home, and all that kind of stuff. And then the framework then slowly becomes compromised. Or at least in the very beginning, it puts something in the person's heart. This is because staring leads to a person to ponder and focus on the beauties of the opposite gender, and this creates an unchaste infatuation, which could then lead to something which is worse. Therefore, the Sharia prohibits anything which will bring about corruption to a person, himself, the framework, and the framework of the whole community. Nearly finished. Question: does this mean that Islam is repressive towards women? Because there's a lot of emphasis on men going outside and women staying at home. Allah says in the Quran, do not force yourself over women. فَإِنْ أَطَعْنَكُمْ فَلَا تَبْغُوا عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا. Don't become over-assertive. Don't become autocratic over women. Don't become, controlling over women. Allah ends this ayah in saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. Why does Allah say that He is Ali? Why does Allah say that He is the greatest and He is overpowerful? Ibn Kathir says in Tafsir, this is a stern warning to men. This ayah is addressed to men. If they are going to harm and be controlling and being repressive over women without any just cause, then Allah is saying that He is more powerful than him as being a husband or a father or whatever, and He is greater than him in his manhood. The Prophet ﷺ said the best of women are those, and look at this hadith here now also. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us the best of women are those women who are independent. How can Islam be repressive towards women? Islam is teaching us to treat them nicely, but what we do have is a framework of responsibility. If a woman wants to go out and work and she has a need to do so, fair enough. But we have responsibilities. The man has been assigned his, and the woman has been assigned hers. The Prophet ﷺ is saying here, the best of women are those who are independent with their transportation. Sahih Muslim. Most compassionate towards their dependents. That's her responsibility. And she doesn't depend on her husband. How can that be repressive? It's giving her rights upon rights. And then she's the most supportive to her husband. Emotional. Counseling, consulting, sharing opinions, talking. But then if you've got a mobile phone that's getting in the way, if you've got desires, if the framework is being compromised, what's going to happen then? Islam obligates the man on spending and maintenance, therefore responsibilities are taken very, very seriously in Islam. This aside, men and women are equal in terms of seeking out their purpose in life. Man is no superior in the sense of him getting Jannah just because of his manhood. This is why the Quran addresses both genders equally in the context of seeking the akhirah and Allah's pleasure, but not equal in the sense of responsibilities that Allah has given to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those responsibilities are set in stone. It could be that a woman needs to go out and work, and it could be, in a rare occasion, that a man would stay at home. But the default is that the man has been tasked and is it's not, Allah's not going to get the women and say, why didn't you spend on your children? Allah's going to ask the men about that. Why didn't you go out and earn a living and support your family? Whether it's your children, it could even be your parents. Another way that this framework is being compromised are through immoral images and immoral songs. And this is an extract that I've got from Muhammad Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. And it's as if there is a psychologist in America, and her name is, I forgot her first name, but her name is Reisman. She's done some kind of a study when it comes to looking at explicit images. It's as if she's just basically copied what Ibn Taymiyyah said. This man is a scholar of the religion. Look what he says. He says, there is extreme negligence when people looking at things that they shouldn't be looking at. The question I asked about looking at women who are not halal, but we're talking about things which are haram. And he said that this could be anywhere. It could be electronic, it could be a newspaper, it could be a billboard, it could be anything. Don't stare. Be responsible, preserve that framework in yourself so that it doesn't corrupt your house. If you go home and you've done something wrong, make istighfar and go back to Allah and rectify that frame, bring it back how it should be. If you don't, then it's going to affect your family, 100%. 100% is going to affect your family. This is what the Shaykh is saying here. It will be as if a male is actually looking at a female in person. It's as if he's just staring at her, and sometimes those images are actually worse than the actual thing, because they manipulate it and they, airbrush it and all these other things. I've even heard that some of the youth nowadays store pictures on their devices of beautiful women so they can repeatedly look at her. This is proof that these images have become a major source of temptation for people. Therefore, it is not permissible to look at such photos, whether it be in magazines or elsewhere. Now, I'll put down in brackets here, Twitter or Facebook, personal. It doesn't matter. The principle is the same. If these images are continued to be put up, and it will be a source of temptation, so that people will continue looking at them and gaining pleasure by it, and all of this will create what? What will it create? A deficiency in the person's framework. His own framework will be corrupted. He's praying salah and he's thinking about something else. He's walking down the street, he's thinking about something. And let's not be shy about this. I mean, I know of instances where people are practicing Muslims and they are addicted to pornography. Practicing. The guy's praying 5 times. Allah knows best what's going on in his head when he's praying salah, what he's thinking about at night time or during the day. I don't know what his routine is, but it is going to affect a person's life. And it's going to affect your framework. It's going to make your iman weaker. And then what that will do is all of these things will then affect your household in one way or another. The most extreme case is death and disease, like Ibn al-Qayyim said. But another way, it could be zina. Or it could be that you end up not liking the person that you are supposed to be with. And, she will then think, okay, well, I need to look for something else. And then it's just chaos. Furthermore, continually looking at these images, including explicit images of the opposite gender, will cause these images to remain carved in a person's memory. This is what I mean. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not. This Reisman woman said, and she's got a study also. This is from America. And one of the, when you have a case study, you have people, I don't know what the technical term is, where they scrutinize the case study. They've said that she's a very, devout Christian, so they said that her work cannot be taken seriously because she's biased towards a Christian cause. But the point here is, she said that not only do these images, these haram images that she's saying that are haram herself, remain imprinted in the person's brain, the brain of the viewer, but it creates alterations of the brain. It causes your brain to be messed up. It could even cause mental problems in your brain. It causes memory loss, mind loss, and it creates infatuation and addiction. Copied and pasted, like I said. And the last thing here, taking the wrong role models, or the second last thing, taking the wrong role models. We all know that the Prophet ﷺ has told us to be careful on who we try and imitate. مَنْ تَشَبَّهَكُمْ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever imitates a group of people, then he is from them. Umar ibn al-Khattab used to reject taking testimony from people who didn't have a beard. Now this is not to say whether it's halal, that's not the point. The point here is that at that time, a characteristic of a person who was not upright was this. So he said, if you are looking like that, then you are trying to be like these guys. If you are wearing a hoodie, I'm not trying to say wearing a hoodie is haram, but if you are dressing in a particular manner to try and imitate a particular look that you know that you are doing, and this is between you and Allah, then this is going to cause a problem to that framework. Because you, in your actions, consciously, subconsciously, are taking the wrong role models. Some of the ulama have said, whoever makes himself resemble the kuffar, and we're talking about their religious symbols, specific to their wearing a cross or something like that, or immoral people, some people have only got famous because they've had sexual intercourse and it's become viral, and they've got no other, skill that they need to offer, and then they start looking at this person, oh, what is she wearing, and what is she... Immoral people, then this person becomes like that person, and then what happens is there's an inferiority complex in that person where he feels, even though he's praying, even if she's praying, where they feel that their framework right now is not good enough. So then you will find them trying to look in a particular way, look at certain brands in a particular way, look up for certain things and lifestyles in a particular way. And this sheikh said here, he will then share in the sin with them. Munawi, another scholar, said, dressing as they dress, follow their way of life in clothes, and some of the things they do is what this hadith is talking about. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever imitates a group of people, he is from them. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, he's going to be with them. And others from the ulama have said that, other things here. And the last thing here, one of the biggest things, and this is the main thing, out of all of it all, which is that a person will have his own framework compromised and the framework of his household and his whole community when he doesn't realize his purpose in life. If a person thinks that he's going to stay here forever and he's going to try and satisfy his desires as much as he can and not be responsible and true to his own self-esteem and self-respect, doesn't give his own iman credit and respect, and let alone those people around him, then there is a huge problem. He is defying the reason why he's been created. The dunya never stays the same, and in ourselves we have a sign. When a person comes out as a young child, a newborn baby, 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, they are the apple of your eye. There's nothing bad about them. Even the way they go to the toilet is cute. Everything about them is just so innocent and pure. When we come out, we are fresh, we are pleasant, and we are innocent. As we get older, that novelty wears off. And that novelty only wears off because we are becoming more and more exposed to fitna. That 3-year-old child, that 2-year-old little girl will soon become a stroppy teenager. And we have that in our own culture also, where people go through different stages in their life. She's your princess, now she's a stroppy teenager, then she's going to become, I don't know what else. That's what happens. And the reason why that happens, even in Islam, is because of the fitna that's being leveled at them. She's not your princess, she's not innocent anymore. Until that circle of fitna continues throughout every generation, every time as you get older, until we die. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, the dunya calls its follower to make his or her life revolve around two main desires, which is that you need to be wealthy, you need to have a lot of assets, and you need to have a good level of status. And if you have these two, all of the secondary desires will then be fulfilled. So whatever people have weaknesses in, it will not be satisfied unless if a person has one of these two things. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ gives us the parable of the wolf, which is that this wolf is there waiting to devour us. And the only way that it's going to devour you is that if you make assets and status your purpose in life, then the wolf, as we know, goes into the sheep's pen and it attacks it. And even if the wolf is not there, the shepherd is scared because of the status. So now the shepherd is scared for his own assets. And even if the wolf is not there, it is scared because of the reputation of the wolf. And this is the parable that the Shaykh is trying to draw here between us and the dunya. This dunya is a destroyer. It will destroy the most expensive thing which you own, which is your soul. If your soul is destroyed and you sell it for something else, khalas, you're not going to Jannah. And the purpose of your creation has been lost. The only way that you can maintain your soul, which is the capital assets that you have, the only thing that you're going to have when you pass away, if you preserve that framework for yourself and that soul, then you will be successful. I ask Allah to make this beneficial for us all. Please forgive me for the length, but I hope it has been beneficial, and I ask Allah to make us of those who see upright and are firmly established in the framework in ourselves, and give us blessings in our homes, and keep us all united with our family members until we meet Him, and that He is pleased with us when we pass away and not angered. هذا والله أعلم وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Have you got time for questions, or shall we call it a day? It's been a bit long one. Yes, go on, at the back.
Yeah, I've got one question with that.
Yeah.
It was pertaining when I read what he said, free mixing amongst relatives is permissible. And I wanted to ask, is there any extent to that for all relatives? For example, I was thinking there's some certain scenarios where you might have cousins that you've never met that live on the other side of the world. And some of our parents might even encourage us to marry them. So in that kind of case, is it permissible for us to be free mixing normally?
When I was talking about, okay, the person's asking here now, is it allowed for us to free mix with people who are extended family members? When we're talking about mixing with people who you are related to, I was talking about immediate family members, like your daughters and your nieces and your sisters and your mothers and your aunties. When it comes to your cousins and etc., then they Islamically are not those who you are allowed to freely mix with. And this now goes back to what is free mixing. Is it number one, is it number two, or is it number three? Number one is haram. You can't be alone with your cousin's sister. It's not allowed. But can you do number three? Yes, you can do number three. So if her father's around, if other family, maybe male, maybe female relatives are around, you can speak to them. There's no harm in that. Answer the question, yeah? Barakallah fi. Yes, brother. Nabil.
Sure. In regards to free mixing the studies, what kind of context is that? For example, can a brother and a sister free mix by them? For example, say a sister does the same course as me. Can we go and revise together? Just me now.
The answer to that question is the same as what he said. And if we're talking about cousins, then a partner that you have, a classmate, then that is going to be far worse. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't interact with one another within the framework and the conditions that we've talked about. If there are a group of brothers and group of sisters and they're going to do it responsibly in a public place, they're not alone, etc., then inshallah, hopefully there's no harm in that. But again, it goes back, all of this goes back to the person's, both people, or even just one person's intention. So now a person, for example, will say, I need to go speak to my cousin's sister because I need to, present a gift to her from my mother, for example. So let me go down her house and knock on her door. I know she's there alone. What's his intent? It's haram. Yeah? But if he is genuinely doing, now he's thinking in the back of his head, this is Silat al-Rahim, and Allah loves those people who, uphold the ties of kinship, and I'm obeying my mother, and I'm spreading food, and I'm spreading goodness, and maybe through this she will see that, I'm a good person, and Islam teaches good things, and she is far away from the religion, and all those kind of things. And you knock on the door and say, sister, cousin sister, this is from my mom, etc., and you spread good words for you, do it with decency, and then you leave. That same action has changed because of that intention. It's the same thing here. Yes, Amr.
At the beginning, you touched upon the requirements of a man to get married.
Yeah.
And you spoke about how wealth isn't the most important thing, but there's still a requirement. My question is, what is that requirement in terms of his wealth, and how does he know when he's achieved that?
What's the requirement for a person financially before he gets married? Because the hadith is suggesting here that a person can get married without a financial dowry. What it means is that a person might not necessarily have enough wealth to maintain a family member, but he's still obligated to work towards that. So, for example, say he gets married to a woman and she says, look, I don't want no money from you, you're a pious brother and I really like you, let's just get married. So they end up getting married. But he still remains conscious and upright, and he protects that framework that we're talking about, so he acts responsibly to maintain his dependence on those people that he is going to be questionable for, then that is fine. Then there is no... Islam doesn't give money, usually, doesn't give it much emphasis, if that makes sense. Yeah? Islam doesn't say that you have to be a billionaire to give zakat. Islam doesn't say you have to be a millionaire to go for Hajj. None of these things. Islam doesn't want your money. Allah doesn't want your money. In actual fact, Allah says, this dinar and this dirham, some of the Salaf have said, dinar, where does dinar come from? Deen and nar put together. Deen and nar. That your deen will be set ablaze by gold coins. Islam knows that very